Barrett Nelson from On the Trail Creations in Fairbanks, Alaska. And this video is to show you my binding method that I use on anytime I use binding. This is what I do usually. And there's lots of binding methods out there and they're all good. And mine just has a couple little differences that I think are helpful. And so I'm going to show you what those are. This binding method uses straight binding, not bias. There are times when you would want to use bias. If you wanted your quilt to be extra soft, bias binding is a little bit stretchier and a little bit softer. Mine go on the wall, so that doesn't matter. Two, they don't have mitered corners, and I just don't want to fuss with it. If you're fine with that, then go ahead and do it. But you don't have to. So this is how to avoid it. And number three, it's all done by machine. And again, if you wanted a really soft, snuggly quilt, machine stitching the whole thing can make it just a little bit stiffer. So then you may want to do hand sewing for the second time around at least. But most of my stuff is going to go on the wall or on a greeting card, so I don't care about that. So I just do all of it by machine. So I'm going to show you all of that. It starts with cutting the binding strips, and I cut them. I usually use a 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. So that's the first difference. Most people use a 1/4 inch. And I like the 3/8 because it's pretty much the distance from the center of my normal foot to the edge of the foot. And I like a little bit wider looking binding on my wall hangings than a little bit more than a 1/4 inch. So I like that. Plus it just works well for this method. So to cut the binding, I need my 3/8 of an inch times 4, which is 1.5. And then I usually add another 1/8 of an inch of a little bit of a buffer to kind of allow for the thickness. So that makes it 1 5/8 of an inch, which is kind of an annoying measurement. So I marked it on my ruler so I don't have to think about it every time. But basically 4 times however wide your seam allowance is going to be with this method, plus maybe an extra 1/8 of an inch to allow for the thickness. Anything smaller than 3/8 of an inch, this is tricky to do because it's just kind of tiny. So anyway, that's why I do the 3/8. So the first thing I do is I start with the long sides. I always start with the long sides. Oh, one more thing. I'm usually making small things, so I can just cut my binding and go, I just need to make sure it's long enough and I don't need to worry about it. But if you're doing a real quilt and you have any chance of having like wavy edges, then you're going to want to cut your binding to the exact length that you want your quilt to be before you start sewing, and pin it on really well. And that will help it'll ease it back into being the right length and lay flat. But again, my projects are all pretty small and I don't have to worry about that either. So I just often will cut a whole strip the width of the fabric and just keep cutting it off as I need it. So that works really well too. So the first thing I'm going to do is just line the binding up with the edge, and for the long edges, it's just exactly the same length as the edge. Stitch across, and I can just use the edge of my foot. And that's close enough to 3/8 that works really well. Get my thread, and then I finger press. And this is not the method I usually use on greeting cards. I grabbed a greeting card just because I wanted this to be a short video. So I wanted a small project, but I hope this isn't confusing because this isn't the method I normally use. It's close. So normally on a greeting card, what I would do is only use even less than a 1/4 of an inch. I still use the edge of my foot, but I move the needle over as far as I can. So it's even less than a 1/4 of an inch. And at that point, what I can do is wrap it around to the back, and I don't even have to fold it under or anything. I can just wrap it like that and stitch in the ditch from the front. So I have a separate video, but that's the only difference. But for these, if I was doing a wall hanging where you're going to see the back, then I do want to have that extra edge folded under. So I need a little bit more width for that. So finger press, fold it to the back, and then I fold it just about to the edge of your quilt. And then you can see your previous line of stitching, which is important because you're going to want to fold this so that it just covers it. And this little guy, I probably don't even really need to pin it. So I often pin it this way, kind of towards me, because that's what's logical for the way the fabric is folded. the bummer about that is, one, your pins are sticking out and kind of pokey, and two, you can't pull them out before you get to them, so you have to sew over them. Which doesn't bother me, but if it does bother you, then you'll need to do it the other way. Almost never had that end badly, but a couple times I have. Okay. And then just trim it exactly flush with the ends, and I'll try to hold it a little closer, but it's really close to the edge, but it's all caught, so you definitely want to check that. But it looks nice and neat on the back, and it was very quick because it was all on the machine. So the other side is exactly the same way. So I'm going to do that off camera, and I'm also going to go grab my card template that I used to cut this out, because I finally have those in stock and they're very handy. So I'll be back in a second. Okay, I'm back, and I have my little acrylic template here that I finally got made. I'm so excited about these. It's a perfect size to cut out my little greeting cards when you're done with them, and they're super handy, and they're on my website. So that was my commercial. Okay, so I could have sworn I only did one of these sides of binding. Must be losing it in my old age. All right, for the top and bottom, what we're going to do is take a piece of binding that is just a little bit longer than the side, and we're going to wrap it around the ends. And then stitch it on just like we did before, the 3/8 seam allowance. And then when I get close to the end, I'm going to wrap the other end under and make sure it's pretty snug. I don't want it like tight and, you know, pulling or anything, but I just want it snug. Okay. Then it's similar to the other one. Need to finger press, but there's one extra trick. So right now, if I just folded this over, it would really want to make ears. It would really want to stick out if I wasn't super careful. So my little trick, I'll try to get my fingers out of the way so you can see this, is instead of finger pressing it straight like that, I tilt it over a little bit, and then I scooch this down so it's still flat. Everything's still flat. I'm not making an extra wrinkle. And just crease it at just a little bit of an angle. You can get by with a little bit of an angle and still have your corners look square. Not too much, but, and then it's the same. I fold it to the quilt and then fold it, make sure it's covering the stitching. And this way you can see right away that you're not going to have little ears. I do have little thread sticking out to get rid of that. And then flip it over, and this time I do a little bit of back stitching at the beginning and the end, because that's the final row of stitching. But that's it. It's pretty easy method, and it eliminates the mitered corners and cutting bias strips, and works on, you know, anything small and square. And I hope you'll give it a try, and I'll go finish my other side.